Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Welcome, my friends. I am excited to bring to you today a special guest. We're going to be having a conversation today with Amy Lepage of Emerge with Amy Lepage. Amy is a somatic movement practitioner for all humans, right? Not animals, and a holistic prenatal, childbirth, and postpartum educator. And she's amazing. Welcome, Amy. I'm happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's great to be here.
I brought Amy on today to talk about moving from those places that we humans go to of tension and stress and just sort of reactivity to more calm, clarity, and ability to connect by the use, with using what we call micro moments. I actually dove into a bit about micro moments. I called them micro moments of love last week on the podcast. But I think about micro moments, the way I've been thinking about them lately is really in two categories, although we could probably find a million categories if we wanted to categorize them. But last week we talked about leaning into little moments of pleasure and joy and love and connection in our lives. And today we're going to talk about a slightly different use of them. But really that's ultimately aimed at the same goal and kind of along that same spectrum of moving us towards more centeredness, more clear thinking, more ability to connect to the people in our lives and communicate well and be creative in our work and in our lives in general. Really all the good things. And these, what we're going to talk about today, I kind of think about them as micro interventions. Like when we're in that emotionally kind of, I might call it hijacked place, like that slightly off place, that stress place, angry, like if we're angry or upset, right? I mean, this is really relevant for relationships. We can go there somewhat easily in our intimate relationship. And so I think I believe what we're going to end up talking about, we'll see where this goes, right, Amy, but is these micro kind of interventions that can move us back towards connection and enjoyment of ourselves and the people in our lives and the world around us. So that said, Amy, how do you think about micro moments? What are they to you?
Yeah. As you were talking, I was noticing me thinking just about that, like, well, what are these different layers of what micro moments are? And I do think of them as these moments where we have an opportunity to kind of hit the pause button and actually take in what's happening, whether it's an interaction, say, with a person or just, all these things that have to happen, and being able to notice the kind of the inner landscape of what is happening inside. And then in that noticing and in that pause, there's this opportunity to be like, okay, now what, And so I think about it definitely in how the body muscularly, skeletally can hold interactions that are, might fall more on the mental and emotional realm as well. But we also, because I have a movement background, we also move throughout our day, and we might have chronic pain places or an injury or an illness or something that those things are also held in our body. And especially if there's pain points in a body, like we then meet the world around us differently if that's an experience that we're having. So how we react might be different depending on how we're physically feeling as well. And then there's also the layer of what's happening mentally, emotionally, socially, like all of it. So I kind of think about it in that way.
It's interesting. Just to jump in here for a second to think about that. I mean, it's not something I think about a lot in my work, is the pain that, like, when we have pain in our bodies, but it's so true. One of the ways that I do think about things and talk about things with my people is, you know, we create stress. Like, obviously we can become stressed because of what's happening out there, but we also, the way that we respond to things, and certainly if there's pain inside of our bodies, like, it's like an internal generator of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. We're like constantly on, like, trying to navigate it and like push it away, kind of move away from it. We don't normally like to feel pain, you know?
Totally.
So it's
or emotional.
Yeah, physically or emotionally. Exactly. And then where does that leave us though? And how we're then moving through life, right? If we're in that, like,
yeah, like that sort of reacting to it and resisting it. And
yeah,
like, I'm just imagining, like, I'm sort of just seeing myself or some other person walking around with all this tension in their body, and like how that shows up in how they interact with the world, and like in how they interact with their partner or their children. Yeah.
And it's also like, we don't want to, shame anybody for feeling that way, right? And like that, like, it's hard.
Yeah.
Whatever those layers are, I think that ability to be like, whether it's mental, emotional, physical pain or grief or what, I mean, gosh, there's so many layers, right? But whatever that is, it's like, I think if we still have those moments where we can tune in, notice, and then from that place, like, it gives us a chance to kind of have a lens inward of like, oh, wait, am I doing something that's exacerbating X, Y, or Z? Or if I actually just shift and pause and feel my feet and take a breath, like, how might that help me then move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's so important here is, like, all human beings have tension. We all experience pain, physical, emotional, right? So there, like you said, there's absolutely no shame in that. It's just simply an essential and even normal, I mean, it's normal part of being a human being. So, but the beautiful thing about what we're talking about, what I love so much about micro moments, is that it doesn't have to be this, like, in order to not walk around like all tense all the time, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this giant overhaul that we make in our lives. It doesn't have to be like a huge giant change that we make or on all levels of our lives, right? Like, micro moments, we can use these little shifts, right? These little moments to make these little shifts, and they really do add up. Right? They really do make significant change.
Yeah. I like to talk about it in my classes where it's like, if you manage to get to, say, like, one class a week, that's either a yoga class or a movement class or a music class or whatever it is you love that you do for you, right? And if you carve out like 1 hour a week, like, that's great. And what if every single day you carved out a minute here, 30 seconds here, 5 minutes, whatever. And it was like continual thing where you checked in. How was I doing? Yes. Take a breath. I'm going to do a 30-second little movement here. I'm going to go stand outside and breathe fresh air. It's like, those are the things that I think it's like foundational. If we build in that foundationally.
Yes.
Right. Not to say that going to a class isn't beneficial. It is. However, for me, I feel like the aim and the goal is, how do we build this into our daily life and not feel like it's an extra thing we have to do? And like you said, this huge shift. Yeah. I mean, it's a big shift because it's also about mindset, right? And it's about getting out of patterns.
Yes.
But there's subtle ways that you can start to do it.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think, when we've talked before about this, we touched on, how quote unquote busy our lives are, right? How full to brimming our lives can be in our modern times, right? And I think it's true that it's way easier to kind of bump this stuff off our calendar and be like, oh, I have all these other things I need to get to, if they're like these big hour-long classes or whatever, which, I mean, if I love them, they're beautiful, going to yoga classes, right? Or getting out for an hour-long walk. Like, I'm all about that. But it's so true that we can just, if we think about them, these little moments, these minutes, like 1 minute here, 30 seconds here, 5 minutes here. For me, as I started understanding that actually is is so powerful to get me back to a more centered, peaceful place. It was easier to start fitting those in, right? I started actually feeling more centered regularly because I started using these little moments.
Yeah. And I feel like it's a little contagious too. So whether it's you doing it once or twice and you literally get that little burst of like, ooh, that felt good to do. And then so that, influences you to do it more. But I think also if you're around other people, right? And you do that thing that is something for you, then they in some way, it registers with them. Maybe they're literally seeing you do it because you also say, yes, oh, you're going to do this thing, right? Or I have a friend who, she'll just be like, morning river, morning birds, whatever, and whatever. She'll just like, and every time I hear her say something like that, I'm like, oh, and it just like makes me smile inside.
I love it so much.
Like 5 seconds, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Of that.
Yeah, it's so true. One of the things I talk a lot about with my clients and on my podcast is this idea of leading love and how we actually really do influence those people around us, like in big ways, even if it's like, we don't even know exactly why that happens, like this magic energetic transference or whatever, but it really does. It really shows up. Yeah.
It shows up the other way, right? Like if we're off, right? And like, and then that just like expands and blows up and whatever. So it's like, just to know, it's like, well, the opposite could happen too, right?
Yes.
And if we're just that much more mindful and present and able to go there. And I think that's where like the physical piece comes in. Like, again, somebody else in class was talking about how what they have found is that when the tension is there in their body, they feel like they shrink. They literally feel their being shrink and get tighter and tighter and like go inward. Yes. And through, whatever the movement is you're doing, but, with the somatic approach that I have, it's like we're doing micro movements. Yeah. So it's the ability of having that lens on the landscape of the body to be like, well, how does that shoulder blade move? And like, oh, if I can release just the teeny tiniest bit of like a holding pattern that's been there all day or all week or for 3 years, what freedom does that bring? Right.
I think that's one thing that is really important for people to understand too, is how much, our emotions are stress, like it lives in the body, right? A lot of times what happens is when we're in that like, off kilter place, we can kind of get in our heads and spin, right? Mm-hmm. But I always am encouraging and guiding my clients too, to come back to the body and to feel the emotion, because that's where the emotion lives, right? And by bringing intentionally bringing our attention back there, right? That's how we can make those little shifts, right? Or those big shifts. And sometimes it's just a matter of actually attending to what's there with our presence, and I like to think of it as our loving presence. But I also love, it's not a piece of my work to bring the little movements in, right? To that. I love that too. Like being able to just feel where the musculature is tensing. And you can say more about that if you want to.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's a learning how to feel too, yes. Right? Because we can to just get by whatever we can
we're like heads without bodies, right?
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah. And so there is that again, sometimes it'll literally be like when I work with different people, when I'm working with them one-on-one, it's like every person is different. So for some, it might literally be like, oh, okay, they are actually not able to feel anything different from when they hike their hip up to when they're not hiking their hip up. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to work with them differently and helping them actually feel shifts and changes in their body compared to somebody else who might literally be able to feel like, yeah, I feel muscles moving, or I feel bones moving, or I can just feel a difference, right? And notice the movement of the body. So there's like all these different layers of teaching based on who shows up, right? And how they're showing up. And, the approach that I have with the somatic movement is like neuromuscular re-education too. So it's literally getting at ways where like the feedback loops between the central nervous system, musculoskeletal system, it's like it's kind of forgotten, and it's just in holding patterns.
Mm-hmm.
It's just helping people start to get more agency over their body and learn how to help themselves and recognize themselves and feel into parts of themselves that maybe have been numb or absent for whatever injury or surgery. And then there's also these like innate reflex patterns that we have that are just like survival based type reflex patterns that get triggered all the time because we have stressful lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not running from the tiger, but we literally are like, got to do this and got to do this and, and the bills and da, 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 da. And so
it's the internal tiger. I think
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So with that ability to tune in, I feel like individually in your own interpersonal landscape, and then with that relational, outward piece of relating with other people, it's like, oh, I can feel myself getting hot right now, or, oh, I can feel my gut tightening, or whatever it is. And then if you have some tools around, like earlier you heard me say, and I've heard you say it too, feel my feet and take a breath into the backside of my body. And like, you can be still in the moment and you can have a lens on what's happening internally.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And, one of the things that I say is when we're able to connect, like it's about connecting to ourselves first, right? And that literally means like if we're only in our heads, that's not like truly connecting to all that's going on here in this mind, body, heart, that system that we are, right? So it is about bringing that like with our presence, right? Bringing the attention, bringing our presence to the whole of ourselves, our body, allows us to be connected with ourselves, whether that's an unpleasant experience or a good one. I think usually what happens is when we bring that attention to ourselves, we're able to shift that experience, or it sort of just naturally unwinds, or we do these micro movements, right? That or these more intentional. Once we've brought our attention to ourselves, we can use sort of, like you said, like proactive, like tools or things that help us actually shift into a less tense place, a more calm, warm, fuzzy space. But that is what allows us to connect to others, right? So we need to connect to ourselves before we connect outward.
Absolutely. But there's so much, I feel like there's so much focus on the outward first, right? So it's really like a total shift in how you think about it, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, and in relationship work, it's so normal to be, I think it's across the board, right? But in relationships, it's so easy to be outward focused, like you said, like kind of reacting to what our partner is doing or isn't doing, right? Mm-hmm. And sort of trying to solve that problem, if there's a problem, which often there is, outwardly, right?
Yeah.
Instead of turning inward. And when something happens out there, right? Whether it's something going on with our partner or kids, or it's instead of immediately jumping to put the fire out or fix the issue, to do what I call like a 180 or a pivot, right? And turn towards the self.
Yeah. That's so funny because the words I was thinking is like, there is such a draw and drive to fix things, fix the situation, fix the kid that's having a temper tantrum, or fix this thing about this person we can't stand,
Yeah. And a lot of times what we're trying to fix is our own feelings.
Yeah.
By fixing the thing out there. Right. But why not take the shortcut, right? Like, why not go inward where we actually have that agency to do something and shift ourselves into a better place? And then we actually can maybe help the other people better or solve the issues more creatively. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's kind of like if all of us are like we're in our way of being and doing, and we're all in our way of being and doing, it's just like we got all these walls up. I've really been thinking about it lately of kind of picturing this. I don't necessarily have the exact words for what the image is. It's more of a feel for me of where I really become aware of the three-dimensionalness of my body, specifically the backside, and it gets kind of rounded. And I just think of like water, not a hard rainstorm or anything like that, but just like water gently kind of like just flowing down this sort of roundish, whatever, around the backside of my body that I'm literally just taking in. So like when I'm in an situation, or even like if I have, like, I just did something weird to my shoulder yesterday. I'm like, interesting. And it's annoying and it's frustrating. I'm like, what the hell? Right. At the same time, I'm like, okay, let me pause. Let me be with this. Let me breathe. And I even think of like softening my eyes and just taking in and trying to sit in that moment of just like a little bit of allowing before, jumping to the conclusion of like, oh my God, now I'm not going to be able to paddle. And I'm supposed to paddle next week. Or, like now I have to ask for all this help and I can't, and now I'm frustrated. And like, and I saw like my kiddo woke up with a really bad headache this morning. And it was really interesting to see the different ways of being with that, right? He really showed a lot of anger around trying to make it go away. And then there'd be times where he would soften in terms of what I was trying to do to help, with like either a shoulder rub or temple rub. And I could see in me, like don't get angry. I'm not going to say that, so I was trying to like do things and be around and breathe and be in a way that like could have some empathy around what he's experiencing and feeling, in terms of how I was then there to try to be supportive. And that some of it meant I also walked away and gave him space to like be a little angry with it, right? And didn't take it on. And then kind of went back in,
Yeah, totally. And for people who are listening, I actually just popped into my mind that episode 37, I think it is. It's called something like Safety to Feel, or You're Feeling Safely or something. That's a really that episode pairs beautifully with this one, and actually gives you some pretty tangible ways to work with, more with, well, it can be physical pain, but more with emotional pain. That's really related to what Amy was just saying. Yeah, I just wanted to offer that. And one of the things that I'm hearing too is like, it doesn't have to, like, how do I say this? So much of it's about making space for what's here, right? And allowing ourselves to kind of experience it. I like to say from this sort of place of just like gentle curiosity and kindness towards ourselves and the emotions even, or the physical pain, right? And just sort of holding it in our awareness. That's one of the ways, at least that's a piece here that we're talking about, right? But I also just wanted to offer here that one of my favorite ways of sort of using a micro moment in my day and shifting out of a sort of more tense or irritable or just constricted space is actually dancing.
Yay!
Yay! I know you're a dancer too. No, you don't have to be a dancer to do this. I like this like living room dancing, like nobody looking, right? Where you just put on a good song, or don't even put on a song. I think songs are helpful. Good drum beat, and just like I did it earlier because I was just kind of in a weird, funky place, and I knew it was like my body saying, like, "All right, Hannah, time to do something here." I actually had stuff come up with my kid this morning too. One of my kids, I was just noticing like I was like not in a great place to work, and so I put on a song and just danced and did some shaking and kicking, and really just listening to how my body wanted to move in the moment. Right. And it was just so freeing. It always is. And stress shedding. And of course, allowed me to show up so much clearer and more in my heart, and just feeling so much better.
Yeah. I like the 1 minute dance parties, right? Or spontaneous little one song dance parties. I think they're so helpful. Yeah. And even just like the going, and like you were saying, you referred to the shaking, just kind of letting the body get like go,
Yeah.
Just the perspective.
Totally. I want to ask you about like, if you have any other specific ones that like micro interventions, micro ways of using these micro moments that you want to share. Any other ones you want to share, or that you like to use with your clients?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I like, to do for myself, but also in group classes and to encourage for people that I'm working with is this idea of even in classes, I'll have times where I'm not guiding them and I'll say, this is your time. You have the next minute or so, do whatever you want, move however you want, right? Or like, just notice you're lying on the floor. When's the last time you just laid on the floor, right? So I just kind of offer these times actually when we're together for them to notice what that feels like and to notice, do they feel comfortable moving on their own without me telling them what to do? Or does that feel a little like, ooh, not sure about this, hesitant? And then just to see, even if there's like a little resistance to that, and then just kind of encouraging. So they literally have practice while we're together doing that so that they then can do that on their own. And then I think the other is like really just helping people tune into like, where are their spots in their body where they tend to grip and hold, right? Yeah. Usually in response to daily living interaction type stuff. Like for me, I have learned that it is right where like my rib cage joins in the front at the sternum, kind of around the sternum, and then slightly lower where my ribs meet my abdomen. And those are my go-to places that I just have now. It's just a lovely habit. Yes. Where I just am like, how's that part of me doing? And every single time I check in, there's some releasing that I can do. That moment of noticing where I'm like, oh, I am gripped and held there. And it sometimes is so subtle, and everybody can try this. Like if you kind of grip a little bit around your rib cage or get like a little grippy in that like front part of the chest, high belly area, I can't breathe as well. And I start to feel anxious if I stay there too long.
I can already feel it.
So that's something that I have learned is a place that I tune into. I sometimes just put fingers there and I encourage myself to breathe into that space. And sometimes I'll just do micro movements, tiny. So like I can be anywhere. Nobody will even know I'm really doing it. Just to encourage like, okay, you can be malleable. You can be flexible.
Yes.
Yeah, to just try to remember to get out of like staticness.
I love that. I oftentimes will feel it in my jaw too.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Or like above my brow, like there's that grippy place there, and the like thin muscles of the forehead.
And it's interesting because that's like a strategy for us of oneself, but then we are in relation all the time to other people, and I do think that there's opportunity for being able to like, if it's in a way where there's like an agreement on how to do it and there's equal interest in it, that it can be a lovely like give and receive that you can do for another person. Where, and I just did this with a couple that I was working with after navigating, raising a kiddo and like, how do we do all this? And it was, a lot of it was like, what are ways that you can, with empathy and care, like let your person know you're there. You're going to also give them the space to navigate what they're doing with kiddo, but you're there. And maybe it's a word, maybe it's a touch of a hand to remind each other, oh, wait, what are some of those like body practices that we talked about to do that we're trying to help navigate this moment? And sometimes it's helpful with another person to help. And it's also learning, well, what's helpful and what's actually annoying, right? So
totally.
But it takes a lot of openness to be able to have the conversation, to then try the things and then be like, how'd that work? What was that like?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I think you're absolutely saying this, but I want to reiterate that this is something that is beautiful when both people are interested in it.
Yes.
Right. But we don't want to try to force or impose this on our honey.
Yeah.
It might not be so useful.
It doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love that though. I love that so much.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is, when you work with people, it's working with that one individual that if they in their own world and sphere start to make these shifts and changes, it also ripples outward too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So much in so many ways. It's always miraculous to me, but it's what happens. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love these ideas and suggestions. What do you like for you? Like we've talked, and if you want to add any more specific thoughts you have on that, but I do want to ask about like for you, what does this use of these micro moments make possible for you? Like what is the impact on you and your life of incorporating them into your life? I mean, we've touched on that already, but if you had like anything real specific here or more that you wanted to elaborate on.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting because you just asking that question, I can feel this well of emotion. And so the first thought that came to me is that it is a way to look at myself and my kind of like parts where I'm like, and my habits and my patterns that like really don't serve me anymore and are really hard to look at. But it's like, it's a way that I've been able to create some really big shifts and changes in these things that have just like really gotten in the way. And to be able to do it in a way where it's like, I'm not giving myself a hard time about it. Like those things were there, like they needed to be there at the time. And there were reasons why like those things happened. And like, the more I can bring in these moments of, okay, pause, notice what's happening. How can I shift? It's like, it only brings, more openness, which is vulnerable, right? So it's like, it's tapping into, some vulnerable states, but like, it's really helpful and beautiful and you know, life changing, so that I can, you know, just kind of on a personal note, like I found through being in partnership and raising children, it was so hard to access that like playful, joyful me, that lightheartedness of who I knew I was, right? And so this has been able to help me find that again. And it is totally linked with, you know, like, oh, I totally clenched my jaw and pursed my lips and furrow my brow, and I hold a hell of a lot of like resentment. So it's like hand in hand, the feel in the body of what does resentment feel like, right? Yes. The emotion around that, and then the interaction. So it's like being able to look at the stuff that's not super enjoyable to look at in myself and be able to shift from it.
So beautiful. I just love hearing how you're talking about it. It just makes me think, because I think that's been really true for me too, as I've continued to learn how to tune in really in these little moments, and sometimes in bigger moments, right? But ultimately, like what it feels like to me and what I'm hearing you say, and I'm going to put it in my own words, but is like building such a much more compassionate, loving relationship with yourself, like with the full, I call it like our humanness, right? Because all the hard stuff, we all have it. We all bring it. It's part of our organism. It's part of just the reality of being human. And to be able to like turn towards it in these ways and be like letting yourself be vulnerable in that way, but being able to kind of hold yourself, ultimately, I think is building this really compassionate, loving relationship with yourself is what it sounds like. It's certainly been my experience with me. And to me, that is such a foundation for having a great relationship with a partner and with anyone in our lives, as well as being able to do like all the things that we want to do. Not all the things, but like, you know, being able to go after any of the things that we're interested in, we want to pursue and have passion for in our lives.
And to show up fully, right? And to be able, I think, even to access, well, what am I passionate about? You know,
right, totally.
What am I here for?
Totally.
Yeah.
And then piggybacking on what you were saying too, is like one of the things that I notice and I talk a lot about is just, and we've already touched on, but it's just that as I'm able to kind of do this for myself and move myself back into these, you know, really so much of what we're talking about is moving out of the fight, fight, or flight reactivity system, right? And learning how to kind of come back to the what I sometimes will call the mammalian calm and connect system, right? Where we can like access our higher brains and think most clearly and be our most creative, wise, loving selves. What I notice is that my husband enjoys me more and I enjoy him more, right? And we do have these more light, playful, fun interactions, right? And we are able to solve issues so much more easily, and he is more affectionate, and he wants to connect more, right? So that's super fun. It's kind of like a fringe benefit, or like a, what's the word? Like a, it's
added bonus.
Added bonus. Because really, like, for me, this is what it's been like to be able to have this like really loving, compassionate relationship with the full spectrum of myself, like all the yuck, all the tension, all the hard stuff, and all the good stuff. Like, that is the most amazing thing ever. Like, it feels amazing.
Yeah. And I've been also, like, as you're sharing this, I'm also thinking of like the connection with my kids. And so my kids are now teenagers, right? And they're like closer to leaving than being here.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other thing to like, emotionally sit with. But like, you know, these, there was something that just happened last night where, you know, all these things planned for months and and then there's like, oh wait, but this thing happened. And what if can I do this, Mom? And I literally had to go through about five hours of like, okay, if I do this, then it means this, and and I could feel myself, like, I so wanted to say yes, but I had to work through all these things around it, right? And some of it was needing to like mentally do it, and some of it was like, okay, physically, like, okay, and all that. And it was so funny because when we talked about it later, I was like, I just had to, like, you know, we had all these things set, and like, and then it was wanting to change really fast, and I just needed time to, and he just was like, well, that's what life's like, Mom, is like, things change. And I was like, oh my God, it's true. And I really felt in me like, I wish I could have gone at it in a slightly different way. And at the same time, it's like, well, that's what I needed. And then I had this awesome learning moment, and I know how I'm going to do it differently next time, you know, and how the conversation will be different. And so I think there's that beauty of, you know, the learning and the growing, right? And we're not going to get it right all the time, or whatever right means, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. If there even is a right.
Yeah, exactly. But that it's okay, right? And we'll have our ways of being with it. And then if we can kind of then, okay, let's really look at how did that work, and turn the lens a little bit of like, okay, that part worked, or this part could have been done differently, or I felt like this during it, and I was navigating all these layers. And
and this is because you've obviously, you're such a beautiful example of this, of like developed this, like, I don't know, I just want to put like this healthy, loving relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? You're guiding yourself. You're helping yourself grow.
Is that tending, right?
That tending. Yes. Yes. You're the garden, and you're tending it lovingly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it makes such a difference in the lives of our people, right? The people around us, the ones that we love.
It really does. I'm so glad you're doing the work you're doing.
And I'm so glad you're doing the work you're doing. It's so needed and so beautiful, and such good work. On that note, how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, well, you can find my website, which is emergewithamylepage.com. And you can email info@emergewithamylepage.com. I also have an Instagram presence that shifts and changes with how I'm tending to feel about Instagram, but you can find me.
Love it. Instagram.
Yeah. So the one that's more focused on just with the somatics work is @Lepage Amy, and it's LEPAGEAMY. And I see people individually, work in groups and group classes and workshops. And I'm working online now too. It really works online too. Different, but it works.
Love it.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? We can bring our work to people all over the world this way, which is such a beautiful gift.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Amy. This has been really a lovely, fun conversation. I'm sure it's inspiring and helping so many people to hear.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all of you out there, be oh so well.